So I've been hearing a lot of talk lately about shootings happening here and there, particularly school shootings. And I just want to know what you guys think. Why are they happening more than they did before? I have a couple of theories, which I will post in the answers thread once I hear what you guys have to say. But what's going on with the world today? Why?
Well, one thing that I think is a contributing factor is here in the United States, the thing that we've done that I'm not so sure is a good idea is that we have closed down mental institutions that were funded by the government. Now, I'm also questioning whether it's the appropriate thing to do for the government to be wholly responsible for funding, such institutions. And I just wonder if there was something a little more intermediate than just closing them down entirely and leaving those who need that help just out to dry, hanging them out to dry, putting the baby out with the bathwater, as it were.
I don't know. That's a good point. I think people are just going a little crazier, and there's more down and out people to start with. I think less jobs for people, the economy suffering greatly, and reasons that people find it harder to live with prices going up and things going up leads to more homelessness, and more drugs being circulated around doesn't help. Why schools, though? I think it's because some people, want to prevent kids from leading the lives that they should just because they're not getting the lives that they want. I don't know, just some thoughts. And Winnipeg's getting bad. Like, there are more and more homeless people and panhandlers on the streets every day. And, just more people that are not in good states of mental health as well. And not that I have anything against those people, but it's when a person that starts out in that way, or they may not even start that way at all, but some people just go bad for reasons completely unknown. So there's that to consider too. Very interesting.
It seems like in the United States, in particular, school shootings are becoming a norm. And it's unfortunate that these tragedies do happen. Why are they occurring? For me personally, I think they're occurring for several reasons. First of which, I think the people that are committing these acts of violence are not feeling loved. I think at the core of who they are, they're not feeling loved, they're not feeling accepted. We live in a world that is very judgmental, that is very individualistic to the point of making others become outcast. And because of that, I think that does contribute to why, in large part, these people are committing these acts of rage and aggression, and it's their way of trying to express themselves, unfortunately, in a way that is hurtful to others because they're hurt. I also think it's also contributed to by the fact that many people are on pharmaceuticals nowadays. 75-80% of the United States is on some kind of pharmaceutical medicine, a man-made created drug to help with a impending issue, and the core of the issue is not being addressed, but it's merely being covered up with a drug. Now, I know people would debate this and say, well, it's not possible, it's not true, or that argument is just silly, but whatever the case may be, if you look at some of the school shootings that have occurred in the United States, and you look at the individuals and you look at their history, they've been on some kind of pharmaceutical drug that has altered their mental state, but that is something people don't want to talk about. I think that's another reason why. Third reason I think why school shootings are occurring more frequently, it's not so much that we have guns and a plethora of guns, or, but it's more so that it's just a tool of choice. And it's unfortunate that that is a tool of choice, but it is the most convenient, it is the most damaging in terms of expediency, and it's the one many of us can get our hands on in the United States. I know some people are not fans of the Second Amendment, and we can debate that all day long, but the reality is that guns exist in our country. And, G-Man put up a comment to another post that Jonathan created about guns and shootings, and I have to kind of agree with him in the sense of, look at all the people that are bringing guns illegally into the country and all these other things that people aren't really discussing. It's so easy to get caught up into statistics. It's easy to get caught up into things that we can quantify and use to help establish our claim, but then when we start looking at other aspects of arguments that kind of make our claims not be as rich, then people start to get silent.
I can tell you why. Mental health is not taken seriously. Mental diagnoses are not taken seriously. These kids are being treated like shit at home, and it causes them to act out in extreme ways. I do believe that some of these people that do school shootings, some of them are just evil people to the core, but I also believe that for the most part, these kids are broken. These kids are troubled children at home because of whatever mental problems, whatever abuse they suffer at home. They turn into troubled teenagers who turn into troubled adults that want to act out in ways, okay, I've been bullied, I'm going to take it out on these people, I'm going to show them what I'm made of, and I'm going to go up and shoot a school. That's probably the thought process, is mental health is not taken seriously. These kids are just crying out for attention. They need help. And when I say crying out for attention, I mean it in the sense that these kids need help. They're crying out for help. They have problems and they need help with solving them. They need help diagnosing their issues. They need therapy. They need psychiatry. They need somebody to listen to them. They need somebody to care about them. They need somebody to help them treat their mental problems. Some of these kids have mental problems and they don't want to admit it because they're afraid of judgment. So rather than admitting to their mental problems, they will then decide, you know what, I'm just going to go shoot up school. I've got mental problems, but you don't see me going out and shooting a school. But then again, I'm not the type of person that wants to shoot up a school. I have control of my mental problems and my mental challenges and my mental issues. But I also recognize that I need help. And I'm getting the help I need. Because I go out and I ask for help and I don't care what people think. And they're like, oh, well, you're a guy, you can get over it. No, enough of that bullshit. But I think a lot of these kids have it ingrained into their brains that, okay, if I'm a guy, I need to get over it, I need to deal with it because that's what my parents taught me. It's just undiagnosed mental problems, undiagnosed mental challenges, undiagnosed mental illnesses that need to be addressed, and they don't know how to go about addressing it, so they act out. And all these people are like, oh, this kid did that, this kid did that, this kid was a bully. No, this kid is a bully because this kid, for the most part, was bullied. And this kid doesn't know how to, these kids don't know how to ask for help because they're afraid, because they're ashamed, because they're guilted. And so they act out in ways that are just terrible. Because, again, these mental challenges that these kids have are not diagnosed and treated. They don't know how to ask for help because they're afraid. They're afraid that if they ask for help, they're going to be shamed. These kids are victims. And they just misplaced misplaced. They don't know how to deal with it, so they act out in extreme ways. And that's why we have so many school shootings. I believe some are really truly evil and some are truly assholes. But I believe for the most part, these kids, it's a mental problem, it's a mental condition. They don't know how to deal with their emotions and they're afraid to ask for help.
Hey, I think this is a very complex problem. I think there are many things that go into bringing out the result of what we have going on today. I mean, if we just look at violence and the way Hollywood, gives us the movies with violence and the video games. I mean, violence is glorified. It's absolutely glorified. The villain is now the one you seem to be rooting for by design of the writers of the pictures and whatnot. So there's that. I don't believe that this is all of it. This might be a very small little fraction of some other things that go into it, and I'll hit on a few more. And obviously, I'm not going to hit on them all. But all right, let's look at the family. Let's look at the family unit today versus decades past when we didn't have, or even a century ago. We don't have a strong, functional family unit anymore. I mean, we do, but when I say we don't, I don't mean it's not out there. It's out there, but we're seeing a lot less of it. So, I mean, we have the single parent household, which I don't have the answer for that. I mean, I split up with my first wife and we had a child. So I'm not saying I'm above anybody or anything, but I'm saying I think that this is another small part of what's going into it. I mean, I believe kids need a good positive male and a good positive female figure in their life growing up. I totally believe that. Now, obviously, not every case where someone doesn't is it going to turn out bad, but I think we're playing the odds here at this point. Chances are better for you if you grow up in a functional family and not a dysfunctional family. And I'm not saying a single parent household is a dysfunctional family, because I know how people start throwing back things at someone if they hear something they don't like. So there's that. I mean, years ago, we had kids at 12 years old that used to get their first hunting rifle as a gift for their 12th birthday to hunt with their dad, or their uncles or whatever. And they surely were not carrying these guns to school and shooting up the place. So the problem isn't really the guns. The problem is the way our kids are dealing with reality. And there's another thing I can touch on here. Right now, from what I look around and I see, parents are so worried about their kids' feelings that a lot of times they shroud them from reality, and you hear it. Well, they don't need to be, dealing with all that. They're just a kid. It's different if you're saying that about a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old or even a 6-year-old. But at some point, I can remember my father telling me when I started, like even in elementary school, like, hey, this is the way kids are. You're going to run up against bullies, and here's how you deal with them. I mean, he taught me about the things that were going to happen in life and how I should address them. And we don't see that anymore. We just don't see that. I mean, I'm not saying it's not going on in some households, but for the most part, it's definitely not the way things are taught to be. Respect. I mean, so many kids have no respect, not even self-respect. They're growing up in total dysfunctional households, and and that usually produces children with a low self-esteem. It just does. I mean, so we didn't see all this dysfunction years ago. Obviously, it existed, but not in the percentages or numbers that we see today. But we have people who want to blame the guns. Matter of fact, here's another point. I mean, when I was a kid, cops and robbers and cowboys and Indians and all the toy guns and all the cap guns and all the stuff, I mean, everybody played with them and they pretend like they were shooting at each other and they did whatever. But nowadays, they act like that's the problem. No, I'm sorry, but we had all these things for decades and decades, yet we didn't have kids rolling into school shooting the place up. So I don't believe that that's the problem. Like I said, I think there's a lot of different little things that go into the reason why we not only have so many dysfunctional families, but we're really heading towards, if we're not really already in, a dysfunctional society. Now, that's scary, but we don't hear people talking about it on the political level. Why? Well, they don't want to upset their base. Nobody wants to be told, hey, you all need to start changing the way you live. No, we don't do that. What do the politicians do? Well, they say, blame them over there. It's their fault. Everybody is responsible for their own existence as far as I'm concerned. You make your own path. And life is what you make it. But I see these things, and I'm at a point where I have little teeny grandchildren, 2, 3, and 4, and it's a real concern. It's a big concern. The world is becoming an uglier and uglier place every day. How do you fix it? I don't know. But I surely hope somebody figures it out, and I surely hope that when they do, they can get other people to listen to them. But something that sounds so easy might be impossible, but I hope not.
It's real fucking complex, Tim. It's super complex. Want to see how complex it is? It has nothing to do with Hollywood giving us violence on TV or violent video games. The problem is this complex. It's called, there's a problem with guns in this country.
We have video games, we have Fortnite, we have Grand Theft Auto. I mean, my nephew wanted Grand Theft Auto and Black Ops when he was 7 or 8 years old, and I bought it for him, and he's like the most calmest kid around. He's like so like suave. And we have Hollywood, we have movie theaters, etc., cinemas, and the only thing different is that we don't have guns. Well, we do, but not as rampant.
Okay, here's the thing about the fucking video games. And this is why it pisses me off when people blame it on the fucking video games, okay? I grew up playing all sorts of violent video games, all the way from Duck Hunt to SOCOM, Splinter Cell, Tom Clancy, all sorts of military first shooter games, Halo, all of it. Did I ever in my life get arrested for a violent crime involving a gun? Nope. Did I ever use a gun in a violent way? No. Did I go and shoot up a school? No. Did I ever feel like it? No. Did the video games make me want to do it? No. So, stop blaming the fucking video games, start blaming the parents, and start blaming the people themselves that did it. Not the fucking video games. That's like trying to tell me that Ozzy's music or some kind of heavy metal music made somebody kill themselves, or that hold on. Let me guess. Marilyn Manson's music is responsible for Columbine, right? Stop blaming the fucking video games. Start blaming the laws, the lawmakers. and the gun lobbyists.
You know, Tom, I agree with you in a way. Yes, I think that a lot of institutions that were there to help people who have mental disorders and illnesses were shut down just indiscriminately. Just shut them down. And it caused a whole lot of harm to happen. And so much harm that a lot of it is irreversible, in my opinion. Because even if you had those institutions reopened them and restored their funds, the moral climate or immoral climate has changed so much that now people are calling conversion therapy something that's absolutely disgusting and bad. And I'm particularly talking about the conversion therapy from homosexual behavior, if that's what it takes. When you get, but it's for all things. It doesn't matter. I mean, someone who has weird imaginary ideas and thinks they're Superman from the planet Krypton, and they have superpowers, but they can only show them to certain people at a certain hour of the day. I mean, they're free to feel this way and act this way and be this way if they want. And people say, hey, that's who they are. Why don't you just leave them alone? And I think, but because society has become so permissive, what used to be defined as bad conduct and what used to be defined as good standards have just all turned topsy-turvy, upside down and inside out. So I don't even think you could have those mental institutions give the kind of help today that they were able to give in the past.
I agree with Bradley 100% on this. I mention this nearly every time this topic comes up, and it's the whole issue of mental illness. There's such a stigma related to mental illness that no one ever wants to talk about it. And it's obvious once you hear all of the details come out for a lot of these people, be it these high school kids or people who shoot up businesses in retaliation for whatever issue they have personally with their coworkers, and just mass shooters in general. Every time you hear the details come out about their backgrounds, invariably there's always a mention about them having personal, like serious personal issues. And they would do odd things growing up, or they would have anger issues. And most of the time, those people never received any kind of help. Psychological help. Maybe even drugs. And I know there's a lot of concern about these drugs, and I feel that there needs to be more money and research put into mental illness so that we can find more effective drugs for some of these for these people who really need that help. I mean, sometimes there's just no way around it that some people need medication. But again, there's that stigma, and even those who recognize that they're having these problems are afraid to talk to anybody about it. So I think in our society, there needs to be more of a discussion, open discussion about this topic, and we need to start addressing it instead of ignoring it or pretending that it's not a real problem, or even worse, recognizing that there's a problem, but blaming it on something else. And I don't even think we're close to that point yet of this being an open discussion. I would like to see the news media talk about this more and give it serious consideration. If not there, then within our social networks and talking about this topic. I mean, here we're talking about it now, and it is a serious issue. And I think that schools should make availability of professional psychologists or psychiatrists that kids can go talk to if need be. That parents can send their kids to, and have that subsidized somehow, because I know that's expensive, but it's necessary. And start having discussions in schools with kids in group settings, and making it known that, hey, you if you're having anger issues, if you're suffering from serious depression, then there's someone available that you can talk to about it. And protecting that confidentiality too. I think that's one approach that we can take to help these kids.
This is a very simple question. We have more school shootings in America every year, and significantly more than any other place on earth, because we have more guns. End of story.
I think it's a combination of things. Definitely more guns everywhere, and I think crime goes up. They said shootings go up 15% in states where you have a conceal and carry law, those new laws that are meant to sell smaller guns, pocketbook guns. So more guns, but also more venom, fear and hatred coming from our leaders, and also more economic scarcity and hardship, which includes things like not being able to access mental health care, diseases of desperation like addiction, all that stuff. I think generally those are the three things: more guns, more venom, and more hardship.
Here's an interesting thought. This is one of my theories that I promised to post in my original question. Is it that more shootings are happening now? Or is it that we are just aware of more of them happening now due to social media websites where we can find out something that happened on the complete other side of the world that we wouldn't have been privy to, say, 50 years ago? Do you guys think that has anything to do with it? Have school shootings really increased? Or are we just more aware than we used to be?
I think the increase can be measured, though. It's not just a perception. And I think you make a good point. We're more aware of it, but I think it is a marked increase that is actually happening too, as far as gun violence, at least where I am. They measure it. Now the population is growing too, not just the number of guns, but the number of general altercations, just because there's more and more people. But I think they account for that. But I do think there are things that we're aware of now that we wouldn't have been aware of. We pay attention to the viral video more than the local news on page 12 of the newspaper that says 2 people were shot last night, that kind of thing.
Hello, Brandi. I can definitely answer your question on why school shootings are happening more often. It's because a bunch of middle schools and high schools do not have metal detectors, and I think that all middle schools and all high schools should have metal detectors for all students to be scanned before entering the building.
I think the idea of awareness that Brandi talks about is something that we can attribute to most things. We look at media and our consumption thereof, and we can see that we are more aware of violence. The lead that bleeds is generally the story that we're going to be sensationalized and consumed with, whether it be in press, whether it be via television, whether it be via the internet and social networks respectively. We don't care as a society, and I'm generalizing, I understand, but I think it's fair to say that many of us don't care about nice, feel-good, fuzzy stories. They're good on Christmas, they're good on Thanksgiving, they're good in those rare moments when somebody is very altruistic and does a good deed for someone else. But I think for the majority, we like the gore, we like the blood, we like the guts. And I think that's due in part to the kinds of things that we consume and the things that sell, right? Sex sells, violence sells, horror sells. All these things, I think largely we have been preconditioned to believe and accept as the norm. And so because of that, then, we don't want to look at the feel-good fuzzy stories and let those be the norm. And I wonder how things would be if that were the case. How would things be if we didn't allow the gore and the blood and the guts to consume and to dominate the advertising and the movie production and all these other things that we flock towards? It's just a thought.
Well, I don't really know, Brandi, but you're right. It sure is happening a lot. I think it has to do with anger issues. Maybe never received help with their anger issues, never went to anger management. They seem to have hatred and haven't learned how to properly, deal with it. So the only thing they want to do is be mad at the world because of their misfortunes in life. Maybe they were brought up bad. Maybe they were suffering from abuse, and something just snaps in their brain one day, and they think, I'm just going to go shoot a bunch of people, and then maybe I'll take my own life. It's crazy. And of course, the more the population, the more you're going to hear about it. Just because there's more people, there's going to be more angry or crazy people.
There are all kinds of places to find a marked increase in school shootings. There is an unequivocal, spectacular increase in school shootings since 1999.
So I think with any of these things, we have to understand the numbers and where they come from. And although there definitely is an issue with people shooting in schools, a lot of times in the media we hear these things where, there's been so many school shootings since the beginning of the year, or there's been this many school shootings this month, and the numbers always seem to be astronomical. Like, how is this happening? How could there be that many? And obviously we hear about the ones where somebody goes in and shoots, but the way they consider the statistics for school shootings are that any type of shooting that occurs at a school. So if somebody pulls into a parking lot of a school and shoots themselves, commits suicide, that's considered a school shooting. If a gang has a shootout in a school area, that's considered a school shooting. If a cop, I guess, maybe at the school has his weapon discharged by accident or something like that, that's considered a school shooting. So, I guess you can see where, like, some of these things that you wouldn't think that are school shootings, but they're counted as school shootings. And so it's really hard, and I think that that's why, people feel that there's so many that are happening because of these numbers that keep coming out. Like, there's 25 school shootings in the last month. Well, I mean, were there actual 25, or was it these other incidences? And I'm pretty certain that it's these other incidences. And unfortunately, these things happen, but it's not nearly as high as they're making it out to be. I mean, obviously, shootings in any place is not a good thing, but it definitely is hard for anybody to walk away from some of these news articles or news stories and because people gravitate towards those numbers. They hear those numbers and they're just alarmed, and this is happening everywhere. And of course, if they're saying, there's been 25 in the last month, well, oh my gosh, it's just happening everywhere and this is just awful. And and the truth of the matter is it's not that many. It's just they're counting these other things. So but yeah, not to say that there's not other issues, but I think that there's a lot of other issues too. I mean, I think that there is a lot of issues with boys that are not being addressed. Boys are really failing at school, and that's not being addressed. And you have people that are telling them when they're young that they're mansplaining and their opinion is worthless. And I'm sure that doesn't help the situation. We're dealing with a lot of really super busy parents. We're dealing with absent parents. We're dealing with all kinds of things. So I don't know that it's just one thing. I think it's a culmination of many things. But I definitely feel that the situation that boys are growing up in these days is not ideal.
Open your back window, dumbass. You ought to hear a bunch of motorcycles. There's a bunch of horns out there and a bunch of dudes talking. Go ahead and go down there, why don't you, tough guy? You'll be able to whip all of them, right, big fella? Asshole.
I wanted to follow up with Lucy's comment, because I think that's exactly right. I can't remember where I read this or exactly what the numbers were, but I seem to remember that whenever they're gathering these statistics and they are referring to mass shootings, that could include as few as 2 or 3 people being shot, and that would be considered a mass shooting. And so when you hear these news stories talking about this astronomical increase in mass shootings, those are some of the numbers that they're including in their statistics when they're relaying these statistics. And that isn't normally what we think of when we think of a mass shooting. When we are standing in the kitchen and the news is blaring in the background and we hear about a mass shooting, we immediately think of 10, 15, 20 people getting shot and mowed down on some school campus or at some business. And while those incidents are tragic, it's not the norm. It's not the crisis situation that the news media tries to make it out to be. In fact, these numbers have steadily declined in the last 20, 30 years. There's far more urban violence and urban gun violence that occurs, and that's much more of a crisis situation than these mass shootings. It's just that these news stories of mass shootings are sensationalized, as Arn Circle mentioned, and these are the stories that get all of the attention, and you have those opportunists out there who will use these incidents as a means of trying to get new legislation passed on gun control. Even some going so far as pushing to have guns banned altogether. And that's unfortunate because I think we really have to look at these these phrases and these statistics more closely and understand what they're really saying and what they mean. It's not good for us to just automatically react and start pushing for changes in our laws when we don't even understand the actual numbers. I think more of our attention should be given to trying to curb urban street violence and figuring out what the causes are there and reducing that, because that is a much more serious situation than the mass shootings. And that isn't to say that these incidents that occur on school campuses isn't serious. As I mentioned in my previous post, it is a problem, and I believe a lot of it has to do with mental illness. But there are other factors as well that Orange Circle and others mentioned previously. Brandi mentioned about the attention that is given via the news and social media, and there's a much larger awareness of these incidents. I wonder too if we were to get rid of all of the means of communicating these stories on such a vast scale, what would society look like today? I think we would probably be less concerned about these type of incidents because we wouldn't be aware of them, for one thing. We wouldn't have immediate access to all these different news sources on our smartphones and on TV, and so we would be less aware of it. And I think too that people would be less influenced by hearing about these incidents. For a fact that there are people out there who copycat what they hear on the news. They want to go out in infamy and have their name plastered all over the news. And, when they hear about another incident, across the country, it gives them the idea too of going onto a high school campus and shooting students and getting their name plastered all over the news. So I think that's a factor to consider as well.
Well, let me tell you, I think in multimedia, people get notoriety through multimedia, and I think it's the video games. Now, some people play video games and some people are okay, but there's other people who play video games and they're not okay. In multimedia, people want notoriety, and they can get it that way. So those are two things: notoriety and video games. Now there's other things that fall into place, but those are the main things.
I would imagine the gun problem would be a whole lot easier to manage if they'd quit allowing guys like me to get a hold of handguns by the crate, and then I sell them to a few people, and I don't give a shit. I don't know, and I don't give a fuck who gets them. Hell, there might be a 13-year-old out there running around with twin Glocks. I don't give a fuck. It don't make no difference to me.
Actually, a school shooting or a mass shooting is considered 4 people died, and could be other people injured. That's considered a mass shooting at a school or anywhere by definition. However, we actually have more than we have 40,000 gun deaths
by gun violence in a year in America. It went up from, I think 2013, it was 33,000 a year. And it kind of stayed hovering about that amount till about 2015 or something, and then it started going up more. And so now it's 109 deaths a day from gun violence. But a mass shooting, and that's way too many. I mean, more than any other country has. We have more in one day. On the average, they don't even have more than 10 of the developed countries of gunshots or gun killings or mass murders. They have in their past, like a school shooting or a shooting at a church or a mosque or something. Like in New Zealand, they changed the gun laws in less than a week, and people were standing in line to turn in their assault weapons because they didn't want to see something like that in their country again. And that's patriotism. That's really, they weren't being forced to give up their guns. And they still have, there's, all these countries are, they regulate the guns and everything, and they license the people, and they have strict gun rules, but they're not denying people guns. We have rules on regulating the cars, registering them, licensing people who drive cars. They have to have insurance, and, and they also keep count of, how many traffic accidents they do or major, things they do. They can get their license pulled for 3 years until they clear up their background thing, or if they have a DUI, that could cause, I think, your license to be pulled. But we deregulated guns in America, so we have more guns than we have people, and we have 320 or 30 million people in America. So we have more gun deaths per capita than any other country. Both developing countries, like third world countries, as well as the developed countries, the G20s, were way off the mark. You don't see this much gun violence, and we're talking over 200,000 people being shot. So injuries that they've survived, but not without, disabilities for the most part, because especially if they got shot with an assault weapon. But for all of what people have said here on this thread, we have studied and to nauseam all the lives in and out of, and we've made these people famous, like Michael Knight said. We know the shooter's name. He's famous. We got a blueprint of how he planned and did his killings. We've got copycats of people, so their names are now just as famous and their lives just as in detail, and we concentrate on that, but nobody concentrates on the lives of the victims or their families if the victims are dead, or the disabilities of the victims who aren't dead, or what happens when they get shot in the head. Like I just heard from a Parkland dad what his son has gone through after being shot in the head, having to have a few surgeries. They didn't have the money. They had to raise money. They didn't have insurance to cover that or something. I don't know what their insurance thing was, but they had to raise money to get his son to get his surgeries, and that child will definitely never be the same, probably with multiple disabilities, because these assault weapons do quite a lot of damage when they go, when you get shot with that. And they never just shoot one person. It's always more than one, just about. It's like homegrown terrorism. And I don't care what the reason or what they got angry about and couldn't, control their anger or their impulses. I just don't care. I've been reading this one author where the first book I read, The Good Daughter, their mother, like 40 years ago, got shot when someone broke into their home. And it goes into all of the, problems that these two daughters, the two sisters had all throughout their life. And they didn't even get along because they were going through such internal grieving and trauma that they didn't get back together for 40 years. And that's because their father was having, difficulties and called them both. And I realized then that we're actually, she's actually writing about how the effects of this gun violence, because their mother was shot with a gun, how while she's trying to protect her kids, telling them to run, and how that affected them the rest of their life. And we never hear we don't even know the names of the victims or anything about their lives, what they did, how much family is there, how the family is getting along. We never hear anything like that. And that's such a tragedy. And I, like Michael Knight, I think someone else here on this thread said that, we should not make these, terrorists, homegrown terrorists, famous, or these murderers famous. Not at all. I'm totally against that, and the media does it all the time, so that, instead of being concerned that this is a tragedy, you're just focused on this poor guy, the murderer, the mass murderer, when he massacres 17 or more kids at a school. We're so concerned about every little detail that, I'm just not that concerned. He shouldn't have done it. He should, get his punishment.
Okay, so I'm gonna comment on this, and I just went through this discussion on a phone system that I hang out on. I'm going to respond to Jonathan. I do agree with you about the guns. However, there's another level to this. I'm definitely a fan of gun control. We need to do something about the guns. It's just too many of them. There's too many problems. The background checks are not good enough. We're not catching people who have psychological issues, vets who have been in the Army who have PTSD are getting a hold of guns. I know a guy who has a brother who was in the Army. He was in Desert Storm, and he is all screwed up, and he got a hold of a gun. All right, so there's some significant issues that need to be dealt with when it comes to background checks. But there's also just a lot of violence in our world, right? So it's all over the TV, it's all over movies, it's all over games, it's all over music. And parents are not doing enough to not only control what their kids are listening to, watching, playing, reading, etc. So we have a major combination of different valid problems, one no more significant than the other. There's plenty of blame to go around, and I think that the government needs to step up, do something about gun control. Schools need to put in metal detectors. School systems need to have them. They need to beef up their security. So school systems have a part. They need to, and the government needs to back that. I know it's expensive, and the government, taxpayer money is thin as it is, and everything is, such as that. But we need to back our schools as far as getting metal detectors, and I think that needs to come from the federal level. I don't think the counties should have to put that all on people's property taxes, and that's a lot of what happens when it comes to school funding. It all goes on the property taxes. I mean, and I get it to a point. It's local, so they want to, they want the local community to put into it. But at the same point, it needs to be healthy balance. So, the local county and city, taxes need to, to be used and to be, part of it. But we also, states need to, back the schools when it comes to security. Federal needs to back the schools when it comes to security. So everybody needs to do their part. And unfortunately, when it comes to the schools, it's all based on enrollment. And the smaller school systems and districts get the shaft, and it's just not a good thing. And then it all has to come out of the property tax area, and that's not good either. Dan brings up some good points too on this, but I think there's a lot more the parents can do. I think parents are, having guns for protection and all that, and that's fine, but parents need to keep their guns out of the hands of their kids. But on the same level, unfortunately, one of the big problems, and I don't know if it's been mentioned, just kind of listening to the responses on this, and I'm a few hours behind. The gangs are recruiting teenagers more. There's a lot more younger gang members now than probably what we ever used to do. It's ridiculous. So that, and of course then the gangs have illegal guns, the ones that the serial numbers are filed off of and all that crap. Or stolen guns or whatever the case may be. So I think that's another big factor. And so, yeah, there's a lot of different things that are all rolled into one.
Yeah, most of the shootings over the last few years have been from suicide, but it's typically men killing themselves, and I'm not sure that a lot of people care. And a lot of these people are in rural areas, but it also coincides with the drug problem we have. I mean, think about it. Over the last few years in the news, suicide has not been cover to cover on males. So we hear about Me Too, we hear about abortion, we hear about so-called wage gaps, we hear about teachers and nurses upset about salary or whatever, which are female-dominated careers. But we hear nothing or very little about suicide of men or anything like that. And even if they created like a hashtag or something, or, like the Me Too started as a hashtag, I don't even think that would even get any steam, because I just don't think people care. I mean, there are people that care, I do, but I mean, on this app, somebody said, oh, well, most of the suicides are just of veterans anyway, so, you know, not a big deal. So, yeah. And they don't want to create any type of thing in Congress or anywhere like that to study this stuff, to make awareness or anything like that, because they figure that if they do that, then it'll take away from focusing on women's issues.
All of the various reasons or issues people have listed under this thread exist elsewhere in the world as well. Video games, movies, family breakdowns, drugs, alcohol, divisive politics, poverty. Everything is being experienced by so many others around the world. Why are there more shootings in the US? It's obvious. It's the elephant in the room.
We're lucky in this country, you know. I mean, we had one school shooting, which was at Dunblane here in Scotland, where a monster shot a classroom of children and the teacher. And that was some years ago. But anyway, that's by the way. What I think the trouble is nowadays is the publicity all these shootings get from the mass media. Thrill-seeking, you know, trying to sell programs, and it publicises the fact, and you get copycat. And I think that's the trouble nowadays with all the anxiety and depression and everything that's in the world. You're bombarded from morning till night with information. It's at your fingertips on the internet. You can look anything up. You can become an expert. Well, not an expert, but you can become more knowledgeable overnight with answers if you believe everything that's put on there. And the fact is everything that's on the internet true? Well, no, obviously not. So therefore, that's what I think causes the anxiety and depression and mass murders. And it's publication of all the facts, and people copy it. I don't know the answer, because it's going to get worse as time goes on, I think, with all this media coverage of everything. And I believe it's worse in the United States, where they show you the gory details. You see, we're sort of nanny state in the UK. They don't show you all the blood and guts, which I think's a good thing, you know. I wouldn't advocate any different. I don't think it's proper to put things on the television that are, well, not misleading, but misguided in as much as it gets people's anxiety up. So turn your tellies, wirelesses and internet off for a week and detox. And see how you feel. Have a good day.
I personally think it's mental health, you know, and the ease of access of guns in the country. It's too easy to get a gun. Anyone can get a gun. You know. And Pikachu, I think you're correct. Everywhere else has all these other problems. Everywhere else has video games and, you know, mental health. But, you know, the problem is the ease of access of guns in America.
Hey Pikachu, so I was interested in seeing what happened to suicides after Australia banned guns, and so I was looking into it, and because that's the thing, suicide rates are high everywhere. They're high in Australia, they're high in Canada, they're high here, they're high in Europe, especially for men. It's like 3-1, but it's not a crisis. But anyway, and so I'm finding all this information that basically says that, yes, they're not using the guns, but they're hanging themselves or finding some alternative method. So it's not that it's went away, it's just changed the method. So if guns aren't there, ropes are available, or, you know, turning your car on, or, you know, whatever other method is going to be used. So, I mean, just like people taking vans and running them into groups of people or whatever. So I think that these problems are going to continue even with or without, because there's something causing a person to do these things. So that's what we need to get to the root of it.